Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to 90 Day Fiancé latest news. The light in the courtroom was flat and clinical, the kind that takes color out of faces and turns performances into lists of facts. Inside that room, the private storms that had once been shown on daytime TV in edited 30-second packages now faced the slow, procedural machinery of the law and the public's need for a clear story. Warne, who had been a well-known face on both small and large screens for years, walked into the courts in handcuffs. He had gone from being a charming reality TV star to a series of charges and a few comments on social media. 2 days before, he had been living in the strange world of celebrity domesticity, where the everyday is both acted out and hidden. 2 days later, he was arrested, and old complaints were turned into criminal charges and personal betrayals were turned into possible reasons for public intervention. Sophie Sierra's $500,000 divorce claim, filed with the same court that now handled criminal cases, turned their breakup into a financial war. Pedro Jimenez's supposed role, different sources saying that the connection with Sophie had been going on for a long time and was sometimes kept secret, gave the story drama a sinister counterweight, turning whispers into a framed story of betrayal, leverage, and legal consequences. This is a dramatic journalistic reconstruction of how private intimacy, public performance, and alleged illegal behavior came together to create what seemed like a moral sequel that the cameras always desire but rarely deserve: betrayal, reckoning, and the fall. The couple's story started out like many others. Two people who met while working on a TV show and fell in love, but also had to deal with the practical side of reality TV. Editing can make arcs and sympathetic beats, but it can't fully recreate the steady loss of trust that happens in real life. People who knew them off camera said that late nights weren't about confessionals. They were about unpaid bills, the stress of being on call for media chances, and resentments that built up into a brittle silence. Rob had always acted like a man attempting to make a relationship work across the Atlantic. He was charming and vulnerable on camera, but those traits were not so great off camera. Viewers saw Sophie as both a gorgeous outsider and a practical partner, which didn't leave much room for the complicated emotional sadness that came up as the couple's money and feelings started to get frayed. There were small betrayals that built up: missed payments, short conversations, and the silent, damaging presence of secrets that reality TV cameras only caught sometimes. The public thought there would be a neat arc when a split seemed unavoidable. A montage depicting the breakdown, a few pointed confessional comments, and then new dishes of drama. What happened next was a lot messier and had a lot more of an effect. The claim that Sophie had been in a secret relationship with Pedro Jimenez for a long time turned a private breakup into something that had moral and legal ramifications. Social media posts and private chat threads kept the accusation alive until it became more credible. Photos were analyzed, time frames were checked, and slight similarities in closeness were seen as proof in the court of public opinion. Pedro's name had its own weight. He wasn't just a private person. He was a well-known personality who got a lot of attention. That changed the math. This was not just a divorce between two individuals who had formerly shared a bed and a camera crew. It was the clash of three public identities whose behaviors would be judged for both motive and affection. Some people saw Sophie's move toward Pedro as a personal way to find comfort, while others saw it as a strategic move that could be used to get an edge in a marriage that was getting worse. The truth is generally complicated, and in the months that followed, both sides gave evidence that backed up their story. People who said the connection was new and sweet, and others who said it had been going on for a long time and was very close. People started to see motive as something to fight over and use as a weapon. When the $500,000 demand went to court, the story became a list of anger and legal strategy. $500,000 isn't just a number. It's a public claim, a stake set down in business terms that demands both payment and power. In the context of a divorce that was filed because of cheating, the number looked like both a reasonable request for safety and a harsh reminder of broken promises. The demand was a blow to Rob that would not only change the focus of his personal life to questions of solvency, but also attract close scrutiny of his finances. This is the kind of scrutiny that prosecutors and private investigators can use to figure out what he meant by what he did. Sophie said it was a way for her to show her worth and defend herself from a future that had been ruined by lies. People had different opinions about the scale of the demand. Some who felt sorry for Sophie said it was fair, those who were protective of Rob said it was mean, and the media turned it into a symbol of moral reckoning. 2 days before what would have been a very important divorce court, police arrested Rob on allegations of gambling and fraud. The arrest seemed to many people like the dramatic moments that reality TV loves. How unexpected it was, how it changed the tale of a troubled family into a crime story, and how it changed the story of a troubled family into a crime story. Later court documents listed a number of transactions, bets, and contacts that prosecutors said showed a pattern of dishonest financial behavior. Defense lawyers quickly responded by saying that the record was the result of business failure, bad judgment, and the unpredictable cash flows that may happen when people live part of their life on contracts and part of their lives on brand deals. The courtroom, which moves at a slower pace than social media, started to break down the technical meanings of purpose, proximate causation, and mens rea. Outside of the courthouse, the arrest was a show that made the basic story even bigger. The man who had once been a sympathetic figure had become a criminal. Questions concerning Sophie and Pedro's part in causing the arrest came out right away and were very divisive. Some people close to the investigation said that Sophie had worked with the police or given them documents that got their attention. Others said that she had done this because she was a wife looking for clarification and protection. There were a lot of rumors going around in tabloids and on political social media about orchestration or a deliberate effort to speed up Rob's collapse. Pedro's presence made those stories even more confusing. As a public figure who was said to have a private relationship with Sophie, people who wanted to see Rob cleared of all charges saw his motives in the worst conceivable light. Some people thought Pedro was a minor character who was wrongly labeled as a villain in a plot that had more to do with legal proof than personal animosity. The difference is important because public stories often mix up cause and effect. When a spouse decides to give police documents, it is often seen as a moral judgment instead than a necessary action in a domestic conflict when money is at stake. Not only was motive debated in court, but it was also argued in a louder, less forgiving place where influencers and pundits prefer clear stories to complicated legal issues. The media played a big part in creating the arc. Reality TV had already gotten people used to seeing human drama as a series. The inclusion of criminal charges turned what could have been a nasty private breakup into a case study for the culture of exposure. Coverage blew up every leak, made every charge louder, and rewarded certainty over complexity. Fans split into groups. Those who thought the events were a just unraveling of long-term lies. Those who thought they were part of a plan to ruin a man's career and life. And those who watched with tired interest in the spectacle, not caring about who was to blame. Journalists who tried to be more careful found that their articles were drowned out by viral clips and opinion pieces that turned the dispute into a morality drama that was easy to understand on social media. Public opinion often moved faster than the legal system's slower, more careful way of thinking about things. In court, the issues became conflicts of proof and motive. Prosecutors showed records of betting patterns, bank transactions, and correspondence that they said showed a pattern of lying. Defense attorneys said that the individual was just having a lot of bad luck and making bad decisions, not that he was planning to commit a crime. Narrative is not absent from the legal theater. Lines are written, witnesses are produced, and the choreography of a trial can feel like a replay of the media's love of drama, albeit limited by the standards of proof. Outside of court, public testimony came in the form of viral posts and interview segments that often boiled down complicated procedural arguments into simple yes or no answers. The law's gradual patience clashed with the public's quick need for a remedy. The effects were many and long-lasting. Rob's job prospects and financial situation were immediately in danger. The arrest and the publicity that followed made offers that had been based on a neutral or sympathetic public image disappear. The divorce request stayed a tool for discussions, but it also became a public symbol that made it harder for the two sides to reach a private agreement. Sophie did not come out of this with a good reputation. Even though she said she was entitled to compensation and protection, many detractors called her opportunistic, and the moral arithmetic of power and vulnerability was argued repeatedly. Pedro's presence was the most narratively expedient counterpoint. and that convenience translated into reputational damage that might not be recoverable even if he were legally exonerated of guilt. The story served as an object lesson for the greater culture about the risks of being intimate in public. The lines between legal responsibility and personal revenge grew less clear, and the speed at which people consumed the story outpaced the slow job of sorting out fact from fiction. As the months went by, some of the most eye-catching headlines turned into procedural updates. Instead of breathless tweets, there were discoveries, motions, and hearings. Instead of the frantic language of influencers, the talks about a divorce settlement and a possible civil resolution of any money problems took on the more steady language of lawyers. The damage was not just reputational or pecuniary for the people concerned, it was existential. People had to rethink or break down identities that had been established partly in front of cameras. Relationships that used to be performatively close now needed the hard, private work of fixing things or the clear break that legal separation provide. The main point of this story is not to teach us about good and bad individuals. It serves as a warning about how public life amplifies private decisions, how media economies prioritize narrative over detail, and how the law seeks to convert passion into evidence. If there is any truth to the claims that Rob Warne was involved in gambling and fraud, it will be found through meticulous legal processes that take longer than the public wants. The reality about Sophie and Pedro's private life will always be muddy since intimacy is never simple, and social media likes to see people as either good or bad. When people are exposed, the lines between accountability and compassion get blurred, and people make binary decisions. But real people still have to deal with the effects of those judgments long after the news has moved on. The slow process of legal and personal reckoning will decide whether the show ends in closure, settlement, or a long, ugly trail of consequences that never quite go away. After Rob Warne's arrest, the story follows the long, procedural unraveling, focusing on judicial strategy, discovery battles, and the human ramifications that go beyond the headlines. Financial exposure. A close look at bank records, betting ledgers, and asset tracking shows how divorce and criminal investigations use public personalities' finances against them. Media entanglement. An examination of how reporters, influencers, and producers influence the narrative, establish pressure points, and transform private discord into a serialized spectacle. The psychology of betrayal. A close look at Sophie Sierra's decisions and Pedro Jiménez's role, which are shaped by different stories about motive, comfort, loyalty, and power. Public opinion and legal nuance. The article looks at how moral certainty in the public domain conflicts with the law's need for proof, and how reputations change in both situations. Long-term effects. Looking at how careers are hurt, alliances change, settlement talks happen, and the hard job of reconstructing identity after public failure. Everything falls apart. The Rob Warne, Sophie Sierra, and Pedro Jiménez unraveling. Aftershock. The first several weeks after the arrest were like a weather pattern that is dramatic in the middle and quietly devastating around the periphery. Headlines made allegations sound like breaking news, but behind that, a slower tide ran. Subpoenas, discovery requests, forensic accounting, and the tired work of justifying once simple choices in legalese. This story block comes after the slower wave, which is the procedural and private aftermath of the spectacle. The case opened like a map of traces: bank records, text threads, taxi receipts, and the small human objects that, when put together, would tell a bigger story than any viral clip. Rob's lawyers promptly switched to confinement. The public theater of his arrest had already hurt his brand partnerships. The next step was to calm down the court struggle. The defense approach has two parts: procedural attack and narrative reclaiming. Lawyers filed motions challenging the adequacy of probable cause, requested the preservation of evidence, and sought to conceal specific communications they contended were obtained without a valid warrant. They carefully examined the forensic procedures used to link betting accounts to personal accounts, looking for any gaps in the chain of custody or weaknesses in the way data was collected. Narrative reclaiming happened through well-planned interviews and selective releases that changed Rob's image from a calculated scammer to a man who made bad financial decisions. The border between legal defense and public relations got so blurry that it turned into one big, coordinated effort. Forensic accountants and private detectives came in, and their work was less exciting but more important than the hot tweets. Ledgers were put back together. While tabloids had given simple frames like secret lover, staged arrest, and vindictive spouse, the accountants looked deeper into the gray math of repeated overdrafts, high-interest loans, and a pattern of transfers that made it look like someone was moving money to cover shortfalls instead of hiding it to steal. But even the accountant's spreadsheets could be seen as proof of purpose. If someone kept moving money from a joint account to a betting site, it could be seen as either an addiction problem or a purposeful theft of cash. Both tales were believable, and both would be vehemently challenged in court. Sophie had a complicated legal strategy as well. Her lawyers worked on two fronts: getting her the civil protections she wanted through the divorce settlement, and working with criminal authorities in ways that wouldn't put her at risk of being sued. From a legal point of view, cooperating with a spouse is a risky choice. In some places, spousal privilege makes it harder to force someone to testify. In others, giving up that privilege or the presence of alleged criminal behavior involving a spouse's income might break that protection. Sophie decided to give documents and statements that showed how money moved and put some transactions in context. Her lawyers said she did the right thing to protect herself and any kids or other people who might be affected by Rob's alleged behavior. For many people watching, such cooperation looked like the right thing to do for a spouse who had been harmed. For others, it looked like she was trying to get both civil and criminal cases to go her way by using tactical moves. At the same time, Pedro's position was both public and secret. He made statements denying that he had anything to do with legal proceedings and claimed that his connection with Sophie was independent. But even if he publicly denies it, his name is still in the story as the other man, which is a powerful plot point that changes how others feel about him. Pedro engaged a lawyer that specializes in protecting reputations, which is a rare specialty that combines defamation law, strategic media placement, and social media management. His lawyers issued letters to news organizations that echoed unproven claims that he was involved in the legal strategy against Rob. But the legal reasoning didn't always match up with what people thought. A lawyer's letter doesn't readily change the course of a story. The party's life within the courthouse became the new rhythm of the judicial calendar. Commentators live-streamed discovery scheduling conferences, and the appointment of an expert witness became the subject of think pieces. What used to be procedural formalities became content. The prosecution tried to connect different events into a coherent story of deception. The opening of several accounts, the alleged funneling of money, and betting patterns that implied hiding. Defense specialists gave different explanations. Real transactions that were mislabeled, bookies' records that showed normal hedging behavior, and the lack of mens rea in the usual sense. Depending on whose soundbite became the meme of the day, each technical hearing changed public sentiment a little bit in one direction or the other. The procedural pages couldn't show the quieter changes in people. Friends said that Rob seemed more tired than rebellious when he was alone, and that he went back and forth between refusing to accept that celebrity had become a burden and being shocked by it. Sophie, on the other hand, acted like a reasonable plaintiff in public while dealing with accusations on her intentions and a social life that had been changed by being watched. Pedro's life wasn't as connected to the original franchise, yet he was nevertheless condemned not for any probable legal misconduct, but for the moral weight of being the other name in a divorce docket. The social network surrounding them changed and became smaller. Some of their mutual acquaintances picked sides, while others stayed out of it because they didn't want to become involved. The media's need for iterative storytelling made a feedback loop. Every new court file was quickly summarized, added to, and sent out. Leaks, whether they were planned or not, made a big difference. A fragmentary bank statement that was given to a reporter became the basis for hours of commentary that mixed legal analysis with moral virology. People who weren't lawyers but were experts on social media gave quick judgments, and the resulting chorus put pressure on news sources and, indirectly, the parties themselves. The defense lawyers realized that their legal arguments were often anticipated and stopped in the court of public opinion. This forced them to change their strategy. They needed to send out faster, simpler public statements that could protect people from the worst headlines. The divorce demand's financial math stayed stubbornly important. Sophie wanted $500,000, which meant that both her real and her reputational assets had to be counted. For a public figure, reputation can be turned into money through endorsements, appearances, and sponsored content. An arrest makes such change less likely. Rob's lawyer said that paying such a large amount would be impossible without giving up future earnings, which were already hurt by the criminal proceedings that were still pending. Sophie's team fought back by stressing how urgently she needed protection, how important it was to get resources that mirrored the life they used to share, and how dangerous the accusations were. Mediators were brought in, and the two sides made offers and counteroffers that were about more than just money. They were also negotiating over things like quiet, not speaking badly about each other, and the practicality of co-parenting when it was appropriate. Every clause in a settlement draft turned into a minor fight over who had ownership over the story. Another aspect that emerged was the correlation between gambling activity and criminal responsibility. People often confuse compulsive gambling with fraud, and this confusion adds to the stigma. Addiction activists said that problem gambling is really a public health issue that needs treatment instead of punishment in many circumstances. Prosecutors, on the other hand, stressed the evidence of apparently willful misrepresentations that went beyond addiction, claims that Rob had fabricated documents or engaged in schemes aimed to misappropriate funds. The legal difference was important. If the behavior was caused by compulsion, it can lead to diversion programs, required therapy, and civil remedies instead of jail time. If the behavior was meant to be dishonest, the situation was far worse. Stories about sickness and moral guilt contrasted with one another because of the way people felt about the law. As the months went by, expert depositions added more and more details, which made the first impressions less clear. A betting platform's compliance officer talked about trends that automated systems had found. A bank fraud investigator talked about the red flags that had led to an internal referral. And a private accountant looked at transactions that seemed strange until they were put in the context of a chronology of business payments. These technical explanations didn't always get a lot of attention on social media, but they were important in court. Defense lawyers questioned the reliability of several expert methods, pointing out that automatic fraud detection isn't perfect and that a human assessment is necessary. The prosecutor's office, on the other hand, relied on the cumulative weight of what seemed like tiny problems that, when put together, told a story of dishonest behavior. At the same time, the civil side of the divorce grew up quietly. Negotiations over assets brought to light debts and obligations that had not been made public before, such as loans co-signed by friends, promissory notes linked to third parties, and past commercial deals that had not been made public. Part of the settlement agreement turned into a way to find out things. Sophie's lawyers used subpoenas to get more information about Rob's finances, while Rob's lawyers tried to limit what information was made public and fight the valuations. The drafts for the settlement suggested some imaginative ways to solve the problem, like delayed payments based on future wages, an escrow account controlled by a neutral third party, and mutual releases that would limit lawsuits after the settlement. The agreement was about more than just money. It was also about how to share the risk. People's reactions were nevertheless different in ways that were both expected and revealing. Some followers kept telling the story of Rob as a victim, saying that he had been ambushed by fame and deceived by private people who used the media. Some people saw the arrest as proof of a trend that viewers had only seen in short clips on camera. A third group watched for schadenfreude and cultural commentary. The narrative was used as material for listicles about the problems with reality TV and for hot takes on the morality of making money by showing off your private life. Influencers used the drama to get people interested. Podcasts talked about motives and moral hazards, and late-night hosts made jokes about the whole thing. The cultural thrum made it harder for subtle changes in the law to be understood. When a court made a technical ruling, the public's reaction was based on what they already knew, not what they learned from the ruling. This meant that the plodding legal process didn't get much attention in the fast-paced world of news. In the midst of all the noise from the media, the parties tried to stabilize things in smaller, quieter ways. Rob agreed to attend to counseling and financial rehabilitation programs and have a court-approved forensic expert look at him. The move was both strategic and honest. It showed that he was responsible in court and dealt with the patterns that had led to his downfall. Sophie took precautions to protect her own financial future by getting short-term lines of credit and arranging temporary spousal assistance while the divorce was going on. Pedro did targeted philanthropy and tried to repair connections in the business world that had become distrustful in order to protect his public life. As the chance of a settlement became more likely, the tone of the lawsuit changed as well. Both parties knew that long-term politicized litigation was bad for business. Attorney bills were going up, reputations were hurt, and the uncertainty of trial decisions cast long shadows. Talks about settling went beyond hard money terms to how they will interact in the future. Lawyers started writing out extensive non-disparagement terms, strict confidentiality rules, and the steps for making public pronouncements that would put an end to the drama without generating more speculation. Settlement was more than just a financial deal. It was an agreed-upon ending to the story, a pact on how the story would be told and remembered in the future. When a settlement framework was finally put together, it showed how these conversations were going on at several levels. The money stipulations were only one part of a bigger deal that also contained privacy clauses, structured payouts, and carefully written comments to be sent to the press. The settlement made it harder for the parties to talk about some things and included mutual releases to stop more lawsuits from happening in the future. For Sophie, the settlement gave her instant financial security and a legal acknowledgement of her prior complaints, even if it didn't always fulfill the public's demand for a dramatic vindication. For Rob, it was a way to escape a long trial and an opportunity to fix his bad public image. Pedro's contribution in the settlement was small. He wasn't legally a party to the divorce deal. However, the public statement that was agreed upon didn't say anything about his behavior, and the fact that it didn't say anything became a topic of discussion. There were still echoes even after the settlement. The criminal case, if it was relevant, went on its own path, and any decision made there would have its own effects. The deal put an end to civil challenges, but it didn't necessarily protect reputations. The parties entered a public life that had changed in lasting ways. Endorsements disappeared, new career paths were taken, and intimate friendships were reworked. For fans of the original series, the story was nevertheless a warning. Fame made private decisions public liabilities, and the way the court system and the media worked together could lead to quite different results than what reality TV shows portray. In the months and years that followed, each principal worked to rebuild their identity with varied degrees of success. Rob changed his focus to less well-known work, such as small business projects and giving talks about recovery and being responsible with money. He knew that his TV brand had lost some of its power, so he looked for methods to change the story he told about himself in public from one of scandal to one of growth. Sophie kept working in the fashion and leisure industries, but she had to deal with mixed reactions from the public. Some praised her for making sure she was financially comfortable, while others saw her actions as opportunistic. Pedro focused on private enterprises and stayed out of the public eye because he knew that the court of popular opinion often sees association as guilt, no matter what the courts say. The episode has bigger effects on culture as a whole. It sparked discussions on how reality TV trades personal intimacy for entertainment and how the law needs to change when the people in these dramas are not just regular people, but also prominent figures. Legal scholars discussed the relationship between marital privilege and public disclosure. Addiction specialists emphasized the necessity for improved support systems for individuals whose compulsions coincide with opportunity, and media analysts criticized the industry that exploits private suffering for profit. Production firms took note, and the danger of casting and the risk of being associated with someone became a risk on their lists. Talent managers looked over contracts again to add language that dealt with illegal behavior and legal exposure that happened off camera. If the story had a lesson, it wasn't the easy one of poetic justice. It was a more complicated warning about the economics of exposing. When private life becomes public, divorce courts, criminal courts, and private settlements all work in a world where cameras and tweets are everywhere. That situation modifies what people want and makes the effects bigger. The story of betrayal that first got people's attention was true in some ways but not in others. To get the whole picture, you had to look at the financial, legal, and media structures that had formed the behaviors in question. In the end, The silence that followed the headlines was just as helpful as the noise. People moved on with their lives, occupations changed, and reputational wounds stayed as reminders of what happens when private problems become public. The settlement papers, the counseling certifications, and the faded headlines did not give a clear answer to moral problems, but they did help life continue on. The protracted process of recovering and redefining identity, legally, financially, and personally, had more of an effect than any one viral moment. It was in that painstaking struggle that the actual aftermath lived, a complicated, human collection of losses and minor salvations that no camera could really convey. This gossip is over. If you liked the video, then give your opinion in the comment box and stay with us by subscribing the channel. Thank you.